Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD challenge. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this, Wednesday afternoon. I just wrapped up Twitter Spaces with Dan Petty and Scott Belsky. Good times, good times. If you are tuning in live, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. Drew and Laura and Umacorn and Sam, great to see you all. Hope you're all excited for another XD challenge. So let's go ahead and hop over to my screen and boop, there we go. So today is all about finding the perfect color, or in this case, colors. We're going to be exploring creating a shopping widget using components and states, and it's all going to be wired up to be interactive. Now, if you haven't participated in these challenges before, head on over to behance.net/challenge/XD. XD, that's the one. There's a big blue button at the top. Press it if you want to be notified when new challenges are released. Every single day you're going to receive a challenge. This week is a 1-week challenge. Sometimes we have 2-week challenges on all sorts of different applications. And then down here you can find what we've done so far. Custom email templates, animated interactive buttons, and today is finding the perfect color. So let's go ahead and hop over to Adobe XD. Here's the template for today. So if I go ahead and zoom in here, challenge number 3, we're going to create a shopping widget. We're going to design a shopping widget with an interactive color picker. And if you do want some inspiration and some examples down here, you can see kind of what we're going to go for. We're going to go for more of a simple version of this. And then right here at the top, we have a tips section. And if you launch this preview, boop, there we go. You can click on this button and you can learn all about adding video to Adobe XD in your prototypes, which is kind of interesting for a shopping widget. Maybe a little bit difficult with different colors unless you have those assets, but definitely something you can do. All right, so what we're going to do to start is we are going to start designing our shopping widget. Now, I'm going to change the background color just because more of a personal preference. I just want to introduce, just like I've done in the past, just a little bit of blue in here, knowing that I'm probably going to have the actual shopping widget more or less pure white to help with contrast and accessibility, right? So I'm going to grab my rectangle shortcut key R and draw one out. Now I'm not super concerned about the size of this particular widget at the moment, mainly because we're going to be using stacks and we're going to be using padding. So as we add additional content to this element, it's going to automatically resize, which is going to be beautiful, right? Now, in terms of the styling, I'm going to round out the corners a little bit. Let's try about 24 is not too bad. I might want to bring it back a little bit to about 16 if you are following that 8-pixel grid. Now, in terms of a border, do we need a border? Here's a discussion, right? If I turn the border off, the white blends in way too much with that blue, that light blue in the background, right? Now, of course, I could go ahead and add a bit of a border, and that helps a little bit. But what I also might want to do is add a shadow, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn on a drop shadow. I'm going to bump it down, let's say about 24, and I really want to blur it. I don't want these shadows to be too sharp. So I'm going to just start blurring the shadow. Somewhere maybe around 32, we'll try that. And then since the background has a little bit of blue in it, I'm also going to put a bit of blue in the drop shadow as well. And it just softens it out, creates this nice soothing shadow down there, right? And of course, you can turn the border back on to add a little bit more of separation, but I think this looks pretty good right about here. All right, now, one thing I want on the inside is a nice large image, and this is the image that's going to change as the colors are changed as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this shape, or I can just create another rectangle, right? I don't need the border, but I'm going to change the fill just so we can see the two shapes. And I'm going to bring this one in. I'm holding down my Alt-Option key and just bringing this in, and I can hover over the sides with that Alt-Option key held down to see how far it is. So if I want to make sure that it's 16 pixels or 24 pixels or 8 or whatever it might be, I can very easily do that. However, I did mention earlier we're going to be using padding and stacks. So I'm not too concerned about that because we can define that in just a moment. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab an image. So if I hop over to Finder, I do have an image right here that I licensed from Adobe Stock. I can just drag and boop, pop it into place. I can double click on it. I can scale it up I can move it around if I need to. Now, if you don't have images of your own that you can use in this project, what I would suggest is hopping over to stock.adobe.com right over here. There's a free section. So if you hop into the free section and search for something like fashion, if you are following the shopping widget example, of course you can do pretty much anything that you're looking for. There's a ton of different images that you can use. All of these are free. So under fashion, 60,000 images that you can use in your projects for free, which is amazing, right? So we have our image in place, and I want to make sure that this container, this element is set up so that it automatically resizes as we change our content. So I'm going to go ahead and select both of these elements with a marquee selection. I'm going to group them, Command and Control G, boop, and I'll call this widget. In a moment, we're going to be turning this into a component as well. But over within the Properties Inspector, we can turn on stacks and padding. Now, in this case, knowing that there's going to be multiple elements inside of this widget, we might want to turn a stack on, right? Otherwise, we can just turn padding on and call it a day. Now, stack, when you turn a stack on, it also turns padding on, which is great. And this will allow you to enter the values. So if you want maybe 16 pixels on the top, 16 on the side, 16 on the side as well. And then at the bottom, we're definitely going to be adding more content down there. And I think, you know, we might as well just make 16 all around. So I'm just going to switch it over to this first option, which just unifies everything. Of course, if we need to later on, we can always switch that back and add a little bit more padding at the bottom or, you know, what have you, right? Now, one thing you might be noticing is I have on the inside of this shape, this image, and the rounded rectangle or the rounded corners are at 16. And then the outer shape, the rounded corners, I mean, they should be at 16. They were at 17, but they're both 16 now. But if you look at it visually, it's a little bit off. Even though they're both 16, it just looks a little bit strange, right? It almost looks like one is more pronounced than the other. So when you, in a situation like that, you'll just want to go to the inner shape and then just bring it out a little bit, maybe to about 12, right? Of course, it breaks with that 8-pixel grid a touch, which is totally fine in many cases, but it just visually, it just creates this much nicer feel to it. It just looks a lot more cohesive, right? All right, so we have our image here, and then down below what we're going to want a few text layers. We might want to kind of kick this section off explaining what exactly this product is. So I'm going to grab the text tool, shortcut key T, and click. And you're noticing when I do that, the widget automatically responds, which is great. So this might be I want to make sure that our stack is, aha, now I see what happened, right? Let me go back. With the group selected, my stack is currently set to a horizontal stack, which goes left to right. Definitely don't want that in this case. We want up and down. And it did that because there was only one object inside of this group when I created that stack, so it defaulted to horizontal. If there were multiple objects, it would look at the direction that they're going. So in this case, we want to switch it over to vertical. And now I can dive in one more time, and that's a little bit better. So this might be stylish button up shirt, right? Wow, shirt, there we go. Now, in terms of the typeface and the styling and all this fun stuff, Helvetica, it's fine, right? But we want to get a little bit more stylistic with this. So something like Jubilat, I don't know how to pronounce it, but I think I grabbed this from Adobe Fonts. If you go to fonts.adobe.com, you can find all sorts of really interesting typefaces, display typefaces, serif, sans serif, all this fun stuff. But I'm going to keep it somewhere around 20. We're going to see what that looks like, but I want to bump up the weight a little bit. Let's try about semi-bold. And I want to make sure that we have a nice dark color that gives us a nice amount of contrast, right? So I might want to pull this up a little bit to make sure we're about, 16 pixels from the top. I might change that a little bit later on, but for the most part, that looks pretty good. Now, down below, we might want to also add how much this shirt in particular costs. So I'm going to duplicate this shape. And what's cool is because we're working inside of a stack, when I duplicate, it automatically adjusts the bounds of the group, right? So this might be 49 and 99 cents, something like that, right? Now, this is, for the most part, secondary information. So you might want to adjust a few things. You might want to bump the weight down a little bit to about medium. You might possibly want to bump the size down a little bit. You don't want to go too much because you don't want to hide that number, right? So we're just going to tweak it just a touch, and maybe I'll just bump this up as well, right? There we go. So we have our title, the product description, or I guess the product title, and then we have our pricing, right? And then down below, what you want to start doing is we want to start adding in our different colors that we're going to swap between. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my ellipse tool and draw one out. And this might be, our first color, which might be, I don't know, this may be blue, right? So we're going to go ahead and switch it over to blue. It doesn't have to be the exact blue in the shirt, but we'll do something like that. Now, we have to keep in mind that on these particular elements, there's going to be an active state and an inactive state, right? So there are a few ways to do it depending on the element, right? You could have an active state like this and an inactive state like this, like dropping the opacity a little bit, but you want to make sure that the colors remain true, right? So that a user who's on this web page or experience or whatever it might be knows that this is blue. And if you drop the opacity, you might kind of lose that a little bit. So what we might do is add maybe a border around this particular shape. Now, if I were to duplicate this shape with Command and Control D, it's going to pop down below because we're inside of a vertical stack, but we don't want that in this case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to group it, Command and Control G, and I'm going to call this, let's say, color. And then inside of this group, I can now go ahead and duplicate, Command and Control D, and it does not bump it down because it's inside of a group inside of that stack, if that makes any sense, right? So one of the shapes I'm going to keep nice and large, and the other one I'm going to drop a little bit. Now on the large shape in the background, we're going to add our border, and I'm going to turn off the fill. So this is going to be sort of the active indicator, right? And we can maybe use this color. That's not too bad. Maybe I'll bump up the size just a little bit to about 2, and maybe bump this down a touch more, right? That's not bad. I might tweak the color at some point, but I think this could work. Now, obviously we don't want this to be shown on all of the different colors. So we're going to make sure that the border is only visible on the active color. So what I'm going to do, I have this one color selected, and to make my life a little bit easier, we might want to use another stack inside of this larger stack. So I'm going to, with this color group selected, I'm going to place it into another group, Command and Control G, and I'll call this colors. I'll turn a stack on. Now this did default to horizontal, which is exactly what we want in this case. And now I can dive in and duplicate a few more, right? So maybe I'll just duplicate one. I will hide the border on this one because we don't want it seen in this case. And then I'll duplicate. So we might have 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 colors in total. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Something like that. Then I can hover in between and just space these out as such, right? Now those colors look a little bit small at the moment, so I can definitely go ahead and increase the size if I need to, right? Something like that, maybe. Take off the border. And that could potentially work. Of course, definitely play around with your sizing just to make sure that everything looks pretty nice, but we're gonna leave it at this, and then we're gonna start setting up our different colors before we move on to actually prototyping this. So I'm gonna dive into each of these, and this one might be maybe red. And this one may be a bit of a green, somewhere in this range here. And we'll try yellow. Yellowish orange maybe, and then possibly a pink. A pinkish purple, a blurple, right? I guess that would be more of this color here, but we'll leave it right about there. And that looks okay. So we have our colors in place, but of course what we probably want in at this point is to start wiring this up so that we can cycle between all of these different shirts. Now, how do we do that? So with this entire group selected of this widget, we want to make sure to turn this into a component. So you can do that within the Properties Inspector over to the right-hand side, or you can go to your Document Assets, press the plus button under Components, or the Command and Control K shortcut. And there we go. So now we have our component and we have our default state. And now we can go through the process of setting up our initial secondary states, right? So if I press the plus button one more time, I can create a new state, and we'll call this maybe red to correspond with the first shirt, or the second shirt, I should say. So I can dive in here, and I'm going to turn off the border on blue. And on this one, we want to turn that border back on like this. And now we have two states. We have our default state and we have our red state. However, we obviously have a big problem at the moment, right? We have our blue shirt on both of these states. We certainly don't want that. So how do we do that? Well, in many cases, in an ideal world, you'd be working with a marketing team or you'd be working with a product team who's taking photos or photographer, and they would provide you with all the different images that you would just plop in here, right? But in this case, you might not have some additional ones. So what are you going to do? Well, in this case, what we can do is we can actually hop into Photoshop. So I can right click and then edit in Photoshop. And this is going to launch Photoshop. It's going to launch my image. And now I can dive in here and make some changes. So in this case, I might want to change this shirt to blue. And by the way, there are some hacky ways to do this in XD using colors and blend modes, and I might show you that in a moment, but depending on the image, it may not work as you would expect. But here, I can add, let's say, a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And maybe I will hop into the cyans, and I can start shifting the color, right? Now it's looking a little bit strange, and one thing we can do is we can grab these handles at the bottom and add a little bit more blue in there so it catches all the blues. Maybe a little bit more green, but it's still looking a little bit interesting. It's not looking as you would probably expect. So playing around with the blend modes might help as well. So if you switch it over to maybe color, right? So we have before and after. It's just kind of vibrating a little bit less. It's looking a little bit more natural, right? And you can definitely play around with these handles until things are looking great. And now we can shift this hue slider to get the exact shirt color that we're looking for. And of course, we can increase the saturation if we need to. We can increase or decrease the lightness, all sorts of different things we can do, right? And then you can just save this. Now, if you were to press Command or Control S right now, having edited it from Adobe XD, it would save it back to XD. But in this case, what you probably want is to probably save it as, so File, and then Export as, or quick export as PNG, or all sorts of different things, right? And you would save basically a group of these on your computer, then you would use in your various states. So if I hop back over to Adobe XD, I am in my second state right here, right? So what I want to do is hop over to Finder, and I have a few of these images saved out, so I can just grab one and pop it in here. Just like that. So we have our default state and we have our red state. I want to make sure that this is, that could work. It's a little bit off, but you get the idea, right? So now what we can do is we can hop over to another state, and this will be our green state. And I can start by just dragging an image in. And you know what? I'm just gonna let it kind of sit in the mask the way it was. There we go. And I'm gonna do the same thing for the blue one, which is over here. That'll just make sure everything lines up really nicely. I'm gonna dive in here. I'm gonna turn off the border. Turn on the border for green. That looks pretty good. We're gonna do another one for yellow. And boop, there we go. Turn off the border over here. Hop into yellow, turn on the border. And by the way, you can definitely set up various states for these colors as well. So you can have the colors as components, which have an active and inactive state if you want to make your life a little bit easier, or you would want it to make sure if you're using those throughout various widgets, I would definitely recommend that as well. And then finally, we can create one more new state, and this could be our, I guess that would be purple, right? So purple, I'm gonna turn the border on, hop over to Finder. Oh, you know what? I don't even have a purple shirt. I kind of have this one, but we're using that for red. We do have a black shirt though. So what we can do in this case is, because we're working on the main component, which you can tell it's the main component with the solid diamond at the top left-hand corner, if we go to the default state in our main component and edit this color at the end and switch it over to, more of a darker color, you're going to notice that change pushes to all the other states, which is wonderful, right? It's exactly what we want. So I can rename this black, and now I can dive in here and pop the new shirt in. So now we have our default state. We have red, green, yellow, and black, right? And all of them have the inactive and active states associated. But at this point, we want to make sure that we can wire this up so that anyone interacting with this particular widget can go to any of the various colors. So what we're going to do is we're going to hop into prototype mode, and we're on our blue state right now. We're going to start by selecting the element that's going to trigger the interaction. So in this case, it's going to be the red color. And we're going to click on the blue handle. And then over to the right within the Properties Inspector, we can choose the state that we want to navigate to. In this case, red. Now, if there was anything to be animated, we can definitely choose something like auto animate. But in this case, there's really nothing. So we're going to just set the animation at none, so it's a nice simple cut. And now we can go through and very easily do green, and then we can do yellow, and we can do black, right? So we have on the blue state, we have all the different colors wired up. But of course, we want to make sure to go through all the different states so that if you're on, let's say, the yellow state and you want to go back to the blue state, you can very easily do that. So we're going to just go through very quickly and wire some of this stuff up. And once you get into the hang of it, it moves pretty quickly, unless you misclick like I do once in a while, right? So there's that, and then green, we're going to go to blue, to our default state, red, yellow, and black. And then we're going to go to our yellow state and do the same thing. Default state, red, green, almost there, and black. And then we're going to finally go to our black state and go back to our default, red, green, and then finally yellow, right? So we've gone through and we have created interactions that lead to every different state from all the other states, right? So now we can go ahead and very easily launch the preview. We have our widget and we can very easily just click on the various colors. And it doesn't matter where you are. If you're in this last state and you want to go back to the second state, you can very easily click around and do that, right? Now I did mention earlier, and this is kind of a little bit of a hack, right? And it doesn't work in all situations, but if you want to shift the color of an object inside of an image, right? One thing we can try to do, and I can guarantee you this isn't going to work exactly the way you might think it will, because there are various colors inside of this particular image, but I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this shape. Now, however, when I do that, right, it's because we're inside of a vertical stack, right? So I want to make sure to group this image first. I'll call this image. And what's nice is because I'm editing the default state, it's going to keep that grouping in the other states as well. But I'm going to dive in here, duplicate this shape, and I want to change this to a color. Let's say red, right? And once I do that, I can go ahead and dive into my blend modes and choose something like hue or possibly color, for example, right? But of course, you're noticing the problems here, right? Of course, you can, try to tinkle this around a little bit and try to make it work. But for the most part, you'll definitely want to go over to something like Photoshop to make some changes. Some blend modes will work better than others, but in general, it's probably not going to work the way you had in mind, right? That's why having Photoshop right there at your fingertips just by right-clicking and pressing Edit in Photoshop is so valuable, right? You can just hop in there, make some changes to your images. You can even cut out the image if you wanted to. So if I hop over back to Photoshop, I can, let's say, select this image here. Right here, I can remove the background. So if I wanted a transparent background behind that image, I can very easily do so. And when I save it, because I edited it from XD, if I hop back over here, once that updates, it might be because it's in a component, I have to re-edit it again in Photoshop because it's basically a brand new image. But if I remove the background and save it, hop back over here, it's gone, right? So what's cool is I can now duplicate this and set my own background. So maybe every single image will have a different background, right? Kind of associated with that shirt. Now I can hop in here and make changes if I needed to, right? So there's a lot of possibilities you can do with, editing a photo in Photoshop, and you can also do some things in XD as well. But the most important thing is we've gone through and created, let me undo this a little bit. We've gone through and created this wonderful widget that you can now launch and click on these various colors in no particular order, and the shirt changes beautifully, right? So that's gonna wrap things up for today's challenge. Hope you all enjoyed that. I'll be back tomorrow for challenge number 4. I don't even know what we're doing tomorrow. Probably something interesting, I hope. But until then, definitely submit your work on Discord or on Behance, or you can tweet at us as well, and I will see you all next time. Thanks, everyone.